Harris will try to tie herself to Joe Biden's record in the 60 Minutes interview. No, in a different interview, she was asked, is there anything you would have done differently than Joe Biden? And she says, there's nothing that comes to mind. And then meanwhile, during the presidential debate, when Donald Trump is attacking the Biden-Harris administration, Harris, sort of sassily responds, well, I'm not Joe Biden. And so she sort of has this disconnect. And even in that clip that we showed, she says, I'm running as the underdog. You're the vice president right now. How are you running as the underdog? You're already in office. You have potentially, you have by all accounts the second most powerful position in the free world. And now you're trying to claim that you're running as the underdog when you really are running as the incumbent. And I think that part of her flip-flopping between the two is, she tried to run on this campaign of joy. She tried to run and position herself as sort of a new thought leader and a new era of leadership. And it's just fallen flat. It hasn't really resonated with the middle voters that they need to attract. Doesn't even really, it's fallen flat even with a lot of Democrats. There's been criticism from her from left-wing pundits. And even as you mentioned, they lost Saturday Night Live. The left doesn't just lose Saturday Night Live. I've seen some commentary on the right saying even that was propaganda for the left. I don't know if I really agree with that. I think most people are not reading into things quite that deeply. I think from the average person on the outside, they're saying, oh, wow, look, Saturday Night Live is making fun of Kamala Harris. They're making fun of Joe Biden. And that's what's sticking with them.
And she couldn't even handle friendly media fire. And I don't even call it fire. It was just like, rubbing turkey baster over her. She couldn't handle The View. And that was the one that you referred to, where she said she wouldn't do anything different than Joe Biden. She couldn't handle the friendly women of The View. They couldn't have fawned over her more. And she couldn't answer the questions. Then she did that Go Daddy or whatever thing while the hurricane's raging.
Call her daddy.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why she did something like that. And of course, there was 60 Minutes. And then there was the late night show. Name slipped because I don't watch him.
I think it's Stephen Colbert, but I don't watch these shows either. Yeah.
And she was drinking beer on that show. I mean, trying to be groovy or whatever she was trying to do. And it just fell completely flat. She really botched all of that.
Well, because being in like primetime media light is not where she shines. She's not, she's not eloquent. She doesn't really understand a lot of the issues. She doesn't appeal to most people. So I think now they're sort of putting her forward. They're sort of tramping her around, trying to get her to do all these interviews in a sort of desperate attempt, saying, look, we're seeing the polls slipping. We need you to go out, Kamala. We need you to really pull back voters and engage with people. And I don't think it is working. Interesting note about that Call Her Daddy podcast that she went on. It's one of the top podcasts in America for women. And it's really a very lewd podcast. I mean, from time to time, the host has an interesting interview, but it's just very sexual in nature. It's very uncomfortable. I don't think I've ever listened to a full episode, just not really something I need to be spending my time on. There's much more edifying content out there for me to listen to. So I don't listen to it. I have seen a few clips of it from here to there, but there was some podcasters, Michael Knowles, for example, he sort of said, maybe it was Matt Walsh, he sort of said Kamala Harris went on this podcast that 2 days prior had released an episode which was simply just talking about like women and talking about their sex lives, and they actually played a clip from it, and I didn't even know what the clip said because they had to bleep out so much of the content. So it shows how far we've really slid. It shows how far politics have slid in terms of how politicians seek to engage with people, especially on the left, making these really disingenuous appeals to people. And I mean, for Kamala, the one thing she has run on really is abortion. So it makes sense that she would go on a podcast that is just so sexual in nature and pushes the abortion agenda so hard. So now we're hearing that she might go on Joe Rogan. I would absolutely love to see that. I would be shocked. That they're desperate if they put her on Joe Rogan. I just don't see that as being an environment where she's going to shine or win anyone over. I actually see it really having the opposite effect. But I mean, if they're looking at their internal polling and they're feeling the pressure, they might decide to make these types of desperate plays because, they have to sort of give it everything they can when push comes to shove and say, well, we tried everything that we could have tried before the vote. So let's move on to some of the Harris campaign. we talked a little bit, Joe Rogan, she might be going on Joe Rogan to appeal to voters. They've also been sort of putting forward Tim Walz. I know they thought he would really appeal to men and, you know, maybe to some women on the right and in the middle. And I just don't think Tim Walz has really done an effective job of winning anyone over. Here he was pheasant hunting. They want us all to believe that he goes pheasant hunting on a regular basis. Take a look at this clip and tell me what you noticed, Sue-Ann. Let's play this next clip.
And it never fits quite right.
Never fits quite right. Just not quite right. How do you give it back?
Governor, what kind of gun is it?
This is a Beretta A400. I bought it when I was shooting a lot of trap because it has a kind of their patented thing, a kickoff. So when you get old, it doesn't hurt your shoulder as much.
So I know exactly what he's doing there because that was essentially me in like phys ed class growing up when the teacher would come around to check on everyone's form. I'd be like, I'm just going to kind of like turn to the side and hopefully they won't notice that I don't understand what I'm doing at all and definitely don't have the proper form and should absolutely not be out here using this equipment. He has no idea what he's doing, does he?
No, he didn't know how to load the gun, and he was holding it in the wrong hand, and he looked like such a goof. I'm telling you, that was comedy gold. I mean, I can't wait to see what they do on Saturday Night Live this coming week. This election is turning into comedy gold. I wanted to mention also Barack Obama bringing in the big guns, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton goes to a McDonald's, and the woman thinks that he's Joe Biden, doesn't even recognize him. And then, Obama, the famous lecturing of the black guys, the bros from the hood, lecturing them that they should vote for Kamala, that they're letting the black people down. And that really backfired on him. I mean, Obama's living in 2000 and 2004. His shtick doesn't work anymore. And I mean, everything they've trying, again, I'm telling you, it's pure comedy gold.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with the Walz is like the thing that kind of got me is you hear that reporter who is obviously there watching in person. She's not buying it at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what kind of gun is that, sir? Like, she's like, does he even know what kind of gun it is? Obviously, he memorized the name of the gun. Maybe he should have spent a few more hours practicing how to load it. I think that probably would have been a good use of his time. There was some commentary from, hunters online who said, someone's a newbie when they clearly went out, bought all the fancy clothes that morning to wear on the hunt. Clearly, they've never been worn before, and so I don't think that did anything to encourage voters. The other thing that was sort of a desperate play here is we often hear from the left about toxic masculinity and how men should be hated and judged simply for being men and doing manly things. And here they've gone out and they've put Tim Walz out. They've tried to make him appear to be a hunter. He obviously isn't, with a gun. The same thing they've criticized men on the right, or men in general even, for doing for the last decade. I mean, this is supposed to be the toxic masculinity that we're all supposed to be very wary of. And now it shows how desperate they are and, in need of votes, that they've sort of put Walz out and made him pretend to be a hunter of sorts.
They don't know how to define a man. I'm convinced. They're either masculine or they're just totally girly boys, soy boys. And I would put Doug Emhoff and Tim Walz in that category. They're just like total girly men. Girly men. Yeah. They don't, they are not what I would call a good example of masculinity. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's really hurting the campaign right now. And it wouldn't matter like who, obviously Tim Walz is of more prominence and his personality and characteristics, that does matter because he's actually running to be the VP. Doug Emhoff, though, as Kamala Harris's husband, it doesn't necessarily need to matter because he is with Kamala. He's always going to get some media attention. But I mean, if you were the spouse in this case and those around you said, I just don't really know if you have the best personality to be put forward. Maybe the person doesn't want to. In this case, they have been putting Doug Emhoff out. He has been doing a lot of interview. He has been campaigning for Harris. And I think it's really fallen flat. I think they probably should have kept him back. Here's a clip of him this week talking about how, I don't know, seems like he might be a little bit afraid of Kamala. That was the impression I got. But here, let's roll this next clip. Here's Doug Off explaining where he was when Joe Biden resigned and what Kamala's reaction was.
You said that communication is key, but she couldn't communicate with you immediately to tell you that Joe Biden had stepped down, correct? You were busy in spin class, right?
That was right. So it was, I was in LA. It was during that weekend when all the planes were down because of the software glitch. So I had to spend an extra day in LA. I decided to go to a cycling class with some friends, and it was an hour class, and we were just chit-chatting. I had my phone in the Secret Service car, so I didn't have my phone. And then my friend's partner just showed me his phone with the letter from President Biden, and I'm like, gotta go, and just ran into the car, and there was my phone, literally, like, you could feel the steam, 7 or 8 messages, all with, where are you, call Kamala, and it was a 1 minute or less conversation, which started with, where the F were you? I need you right now, and basically get to work. And I did.
You run out sweaty? Are you wearing the tight biking shorts? Do you have those clackety-clack spikes on, the whole thing? Or
I try not to do the tight biking shorts, so I just do like the long old school, Nike basketball shorts, which probably aren't great for spin class. But I was drenched in sweat. I took the clackety-clack shoes off, but the car wasn't exactly on the curb, so it was still a couple of 100 yards of old guy half running, trying to get to that car to jump on the phone and get in the mix.
Okay, the most shocking part of that clip to me is that Doug Emhoff does spin. He does not look or sound like the most energetic guy, and spin classes can be pretty grueling.
Mhm.
It's just hilarious to me that he was so afraid of his wife that he left the spin class and ran. Like, how is he so integral to the campaign that he couldn't have taken another 10 or 15 minutes to finish his class, dry off, have a shower, get changed, and head to his car? He's really doesn't come across as someone who's integral to the campaign. And now you even make the argument that it would have been better for the campaign to hold him back based on all of the allegations that are coming out about him.
Right.
I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but there's been allegations put forward that he hit a previous girlfriend so hard that she spun around. And as well, that he knocked up his nanny in his previous marriage, and then the nanny never had the baby. So raising a lot of questions as to what happened there. So now these headlines are coming forward. Doug Emhoff, I think it was a mistake for them to sort of hard launch him as, Harris's husband. And, then we see these interviews of him, and he's just not a manly man at all. Like, I can't imagine ordering my husband to leave his workout early to come home. If there was an emergency,
Mhm.
the Harris campaign couldn't handle 15 minutes without Doug Emhoff.
Well, obviously, she was stressed out about what was happening, and he was away, and she was upset that he was away. But the funny thing is that there have been allegations about Kamala being very hard on her staff and losing a lot of staff and making people call her the general. And obviously she comes across in this clip as a ball breaker, an absolute ball breaker. And and I wouldn't be admitting it. And he's just talking away like, it's perfectly acceptable. Well, that's not what I call any version of a man. Okay. You can be metrosexual, you can be understanding, you can be, you can even drink soy milk if you want. But that comes across as just an absolute wimp. He just comes across as a wimp in that clip. And I don't know why they would even let him admit that.
It's also funny because if the roles were reversed and there was a situation where there was a wife who said, oh, my husband needs to get a hold of me, and, I was in the middle of something, so I had to run to the car and he wasn't happy, people would be like, oh, you're in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
People would absolutely eat that man alive and say, oh, your wife's afraid of you. Like, this is clearly a toxic relationship. This is clearly an abusive relationship. But when it's role reversal, actually women can get away with so much more in terms of how they treat men.
But it wasn't a good call to have that interview. And I mean, he's just talking away like it's perfectly acceptable. I mean, this is how disconnected they are from how people might perceive them. Between Tim Walz not figuring out how to load a gun and this guy admitting that he ran to the car full sweaty, all sweaty and all this, just to appease the general, as we would. It was funny. It was really amusing, actually.
The other interesting thing about the clip is, you described it kind of makes Kamala Harris come across as a bit of a ball breaker. If you think about someone in terms of like a presidential context, you probably do want someone who's a bit of a ball breaker, but she's never come across that elsewhere. Like there's been sort of these leaks of how she's treated staff poorly, and she clearly has a bit of a bizarre relationship with her husband. But when it actually matters in terms of like diplomacy with other countries, especially countries that are hostile to the Western world, she definitely doesn't come across as a ball breaker. So she seems to really not have narrowed down when it's appropriate, like in a relationship with friends and certainly with your husband is an appropriate time to be empathetic and soft and kind and loving. I think she seems to have those roles reversed. She wants to be empathetic and kind and loving to other, adversaries to the United States and to their enemies, but with her staff and with her husband, that's when she's going to be, a real tough meanie. So, maybe time for some inward reflecting there.
That's evidence the power has gone to her head, I think. The power over the years and the breaks she's had, clearly it's gone to her head. And, she's not, I guess, grounded in the slightest. But you always, like, if you're insecure, you'll treat people closest to you that way. But the people that you're afraid of, like the dictators and the audiences she's talking to, she's a totally different person.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe the Harris campaign has even picked up a little bit on the fact that Doug Emhoff and Tim Walz are falling flat with men, because they released this campaign ad this week to try to scoop up those voters that might otherwise not have liked them. Take a look at this.
I'm a man.
I'm a man.
I'm a man, man.
And I'm man enough.
I'm man enough to enjoy a barrel-proof bourbon.
Neat.
Man enough to cook my steak rare.
Man enough to deadlift 500, then braid the out of my daughter's hair.
You think I'm afraid to rebuild a carburetor? I eat carburetors for breakfast.
I ain't afraid of bears.
That's what bear hugs are for.
I'll tell you another thing I sure as shit am not afraid of. Women.
I'm not afraid of women.
I'm not afraid of women.
They want to control their bodies? I say go for it.
They want to use IVF to start a family? I'm not afraid of families.
They want to be childless cat ladies? Have all the cats you want.
Woman wants to be president? Well, I hope she has the guts to look me right in the eye and accept my full-throated endorsement. Because I'm man enough to support women.
Man enough to know what kind of donuts I like.
Man enough to admit I'm lost, even when I refuse to ask for directions.
Man enough to not ban young women from reading Little Women.
Or one of those pants books that the sisters like. I'm man enough to raw dog a flight. It sucked. Not worth it.
I'm man enough to be emotional in front of my wife.
In front of my kids.
In front of my horse.
I'm man enough to tell you that I cry at Love Actually.
Good Will Hunting.
West Side Story. That and Predator.
And I'm sick of so-called men domineering, belittling, and controlling women just so they can feel more powerful.
That's not how my mama raised me.
I love women. I love women who support their families.
Women who decide not to have families.
Women who take charge.
And I'm man enough to help them win.
But who is trying to ban anyone from reading Little Women? Like, when has Little Women been on a list of controversial books? Like, I get that they thought it sounded good for the clip, but they should have at least tried to insert a book title that would have made some sense, that people would have been like, okay, yeah, Little Women. Like, I don't know anyone that's ever had an issue with Little Women. Maybe I've missed something. I don't remember that being controversial at any point, though.
It had the word women in it. That's it. They wanted to emphasize women. I mean, this is just, first of all, they're all actors. They're not voters. So they're all actors. And you notice how they picked a cross section, heavy, buff, long
Someone
beard.
we can all relate to. Yeah.
Yeah. Long beard, that kind of stuff. But I mean, it was the most ludicrous ad, because they're implying that someone like Trump and the people who follow Trump are these misogynistic women haters who will beat up on women, don't want to give them, the right to have an abortion or whatever. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about abortion. I just want to get this in here. What about prevention? What about, there's all this talk about abortion. How about not getting pregnant? How about safe sex? There's no talk about that. It seems to be that, and I believe in abortion if you're raped and if, but as my wife was saying yesterday, there's not enough little babies to adopt these days. what about having the baby full term and giving it up for adoption? That's the most selfless thing you can do. But, it's all focused on abortion, and evidently misogynistic men won't let their women decide what they want to do.
Yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head. To me, the crux of that advertisement was when you had the first man come out and say, "I'm not afraid of women." That's when they actually know the beginning was a little bit of satire, joking
Mhm.
around, trying to have draw people in, make them laugh at it. And then they finally got to what they were, "Oh, I'm a man and I'm not afraid of women." Basically saying, if you're a man, you should vote for Kamala Harris. The men that I know, either, if they're American or Canadian, wouldn't or aren't voting for Kamala Harris, not because she's a woman. It's because of the policies that she's put forward, or
Mhm.
perhaps maybe even more accurately, a lack of policies that she's put forward, considering that we know so little about what she actually plans to do. Her whole campaign has been about abortion and joy, but there's not a lot of concrete substance there. So I think when they make that claim, it's falling flat because that's not why men in the States aren't voting for Kamala Harris, because she's a woman. Maybe
And
there's the odd person here or there,
Mhm.
but I sort of doubt it, because I think there's already so many reasons not to vote for her that if someone was being genuinely honest with themselves, would be like, well, I don't like this, that, or the other,
Right.
not, because of her chromosomes.
Well, over the course of the last couple weeks, I found that more women are easily seduced by the emotions, by the gut feelings. Oh, she's going to bring joy. Oh, she's nicer. Oh, she presents better. He's this, that, and the other thing, an awful creature, not thinking about the future of the United States or the future of America. And I think women are more easily manipulated by her message than men. I mean, it says something about that men uh, are making the decision based on their heads, not their hearts.
Yeah, and I think you raised an interesting point, which is something that I heard from other commentators, was that this advertisement actually did a lot more to appeal to women than it
Mhm.
did for men. And it was actually an advertisement that might appeal to women through its, their efforts to be humorous. I can see that some women on the left would have found that humorous. I can,
Mhm.
and it's sort of emotional appeal.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if it would have resonated with male voters, as I'm not a man myself. As I said, I can't imagine it resonating with any of the men that I do know,
Mhm.
but I certainly can imagine that it would have resonated with female voters on the left. So I don't know if they've done anything to win over any voters. It might have just been a little bit of a waste of time and money, but that's my take. All right, everyone, that's all we have time for today. We'll be back next week with more coverage on the American election for you all. Sue-Ann, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. I'll see you later. God bless.